My father shoved a polished silver tray into my hands before he even looked me in the eyes. Perfect timing, Arthur Montgomery said. The champagne is getting warm. The tray held 12 crystal flutes that probably cost more than the coat I was wearing. My shoulders ached from staying awake for 36 straight hours, and the weight of the tray felt heavier than it should have. My trench coat covered the government-issued tactical pants I hadn't even had time to change out of. I had driven straight from work to my father's estate in Alexandria because his assistant called 3 times, saying, "Mr. Montgomery expects the whole family." Apparently, family meant unpaid staff. The kitchen buzzed with caterers from Blackwood Culinary Group. Someone brushed past me, carrying lobster tails. Another chef checked the temperature on a rack of filet mignon. The dinner alone probably cost more than my first car. Arthur adjusted his tuxedo cufflinks without looking at me. "Try to smile tonight. I've been awake for a while, so have successful people." That almost made me laugh. Instead, I balanced the tray. From the ballroom came the sound of expensive conversations: CEOs, venture capital partners, federal contractors, a retired senator. People who liked hearing themselves speak almost as much as they liked hearing their own titles. Arthur waved one of them toward the kitchen entrance. "There she is," he announced. "My daughter Scarlett." Several heads turned. For 1 second, I almost believed he was introducing me because he was proud. Then he smiled. "She works one of those little government office jobs, pushes paperwork around somewhere. Taxpayers probably spend twice what she's worth." The group laughed. One man asked, "Washington?" Arthur shrugged. "Some anonymous agency, nothing exciting. If she actually did something important, she'd be allowed to talk about it." Another round of laughter. I recognized that type immediately. People who assumed silence meant insignificance. If only they knew how many careers depended on keeping certain conversations out of rooms exactly like this one. Arthur grabbed a flute from the tray before I had even started serving. "Walk around. Keep everyone's glasses full. I'm a guest." "No," he looked me up and down. "Tonight you're useful." A woman wearing enough diamonds to fund a college scholarship smiled politely at me. "Oh, that's nice. It's good when adult children help out." Arthur nodded dramatically. "We've always tried teaching responsibility." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to keep my mouth shut, not because he's deserved restraint. Because I had spent years learning that reacting emotionally in the wrong room could cost far more than pride. There was something else, too. Inside the left pocket of my trench coat rested a small black challenge coin sealed inside a leather pouch. Nobody in this house had ever seen it. Nobody here even knew it existed. If they had, tonight would have ended very differently. Not yet. That coin had stayed hidden through congressional briefings, classified deployments, and years of family dinners where I listened to people describe me as the least successful Montgomery. It would stay hidden a little longer. I stepped into the ballroom. Crisp chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the staircase. Waiters moved in perfect rhythm, almost like they had rehearsed every turn. One waiter glanced at my tray. "Need help? I'm fine." He smiled. "You don't look like catering." "I get that a lot." He chuckled and disappeared into the crowd. Sometimes strangers noticed more than family ever did. I offered champagne around the room. "Thank you. Lovely. Another, please." Nobody bothered asking my name. To them, I belonged to the staff. Honestly, that was easier. People asked fewer questions. Near the fireplace, Arthur continued entertaining his guests. "My son Garrison understands business," he said proudly. "That boy knows how to build wealth." I nearly dropped a glass. "Build?" The last its company Garrison started had burned through almost $870,000 in investor money before collapsing 8 months later. His latest consulting firm occupied a downtown office, mostly because creditors hadn't locked the doors yet. Arthur conveniently forgot those details. Success always sounded better after editing. Someone tapped my elbow. "Champagne?" I handed over another glass. A woman whispered to her husband, thinking I couldn't hear. "Poor thing. She probably couldn't find anything better," I almost answered. Instead, I counted my breathing. 4 seconds in, hold for 4. 4 seconds out, hold again. Bacchus breathing, simple, reliable. The same rhythm I trusted when everything around me threatened to move too fast. It slowed my pulse, sharpened my focus, reminded me that discipline wasn't something you turned on only during work. It followed you everywhere, even into your father's dining room. Arthur suddenly appeared beside me again. His voice dropped. Would it kill you to look grateful? I'm here, aren't I? That's exactly the attitude I'm talking about. He snapped his fingers inches from my face. The sharp crack echoed louder than the music. Don't embarrass this family with that miserable expression. People already think you've wasted your life. Several nearby guests pretended not to hear. They heard every word. I looked directly at my father. For just a moment. Not with anger, not with defeat. Simply long enough to remember something far more important than this room. The oath I had taken years ago wasn't to protect my reputation. It wasn't to protect my family's name. It wasn't even to protect my own comfort. It was to defend people who would never know my name. Some promises don't come with applause. Some careers don't fit inside cocktail conversations. And sometimes the hardest mission isn't keeping national secrets. It's standing perfectly still, while the people who should know your worth keep trying to convince everyone, including themselves, that you have none. So I adjusted the tray, steadied my breathing once more, and walked deeper into the crowd. None of them noticed the small leather pouch hidden inside my coat. They couldn't have guessed why I never let it leave my side. By the end of this night, that forgotten piece of metal would become the one thing in the room nobody could laugh at anymore. I shifted the tray to my left hand before another guest reached for a champagne flute. "Thank you," he said without looking at my face. "You're welcome." He had already turned back to his conversation before I finished speaking. That was fine. Invisible people heard everything. A group of executives stood near the grand piano comparing vacation homes in Aspen and Jackson Hole. Two defense contractors argued over golf handicaps. Someone laughed about spending $18,400 on a charity auction bottle of bourbon that nobody intended to open. Across the room, my father fit in perfectly. Arthur always loved rooms where everyone wore expensive watches and introduced themselves by their net worth. He raised his glass toward Garrison. "My son finally understands how real business works." Garrison grinned like he'd built an empire from scratch instead of digging himself into another financial hole. He was wearing an Italian suit that still had the tailor's temporary stitching hidden inside one sleeve. I knew because I had quietly paid that invoice. He didn't. Neither did anyone else. 7 years. That number stayed with me as I walked between tables. For 7 years, everyone believed the Montgomery family fortune had recovered after my mother's death. The truth lived inside paperwork. Nobody in this house had ever bothered reading. After Mom passed away, the estate wasn't thriving. It was on collapse. Property taxes were overdue. The mortgage on the Alexandria estate had entered default. The lake house she loved carried enough unpaid expenses that the bank scheduled preliminary foreclosure proceedings. Arthur never admitted any of it. He couldn't. His entire reputation depended on looking untouchable. So while everyone assumed his businesses were carrying the family, someone else quietly kept the lights on. Not him, me. Every deployment bonus, every hazardous duty payment, every classified operational incentive that legally could be invested. I transferred it through an estate attorney named Daniel Cross, who specialized in confidential trust administration. The agreement was simple. My name never appeared. The money entered the Montgomery Family Preservation Trust anonymously. Arthur believed the trust still contained investments my grandfather had left decades earlier. Garrison assumed rich families simply stayed rich forever. Neither one ever questioned why another deposit somehow appeared whenever their spending outran reality. Over 7 years, those deposits added up to more than $210,000, enough to stop foreclosure, enough to preserve the lake house, enough to maintain the estate where they now treated me like hired help. Irony had a strange sense of humor. I carried another tray of drinks through the ballroom. The imported marble beneath everyone's shoes had technically been paid for twice. Once when my parents bought the house. Again when my paycheck saved it. Near one hallway, Genevieve stood with two Winsons discussing European vacations. I told Garrison, she laughed. Some people just aren't ambitious enough to build wealth. One woman asked, "What about his sister?" Genevieve gave the practiced smile she reserved for gossip. "Oh, Scarlett's comfortable settling. Government people usually are. Comfortable." That word almost made me laugh. Comfort wasn't sleeping in secure facilities. Comfort wasn't missing birthdays, because classified operations couldn't wait. Comfort wasn't explaining your absence with half-truths, because self-answer belonged inside a sieve. But correcting her wouldn't change anything. People believed whatever story made them feel smartest. A waiter passed carrying a tray of bourbon. I exchanged my empty champagne tray for fresh glasses. Macallan 25. Arthur had always liked buying labels other people recognized. Near the custom walnut bar, Garrison finally noticed me. There she is. He crooked one finger. I walked over. He leaned casually against the polished counter while 3 investors listened. You're getting better at this. At carrying trays, at knowing your place. One investor laughed awkwardly. Garrison lifted his crystal tumbler. This needs attention. I reached for the bottle. He stopped me. No, not that one. He pointed toward a locked display behind the bar, the premium bottle. The bartender hesitated. Mr. Montgomery said. The bartender unlocked the cabinet. Garrison looked straight at me. Go ahead. I poured exactly 2 fingers. He watched every drop. Careful, he said. That's probably more expensive than your weekly paycheck. One of the investors chuckled. Garrison smiled wider. You've probably never tasted anything like this. I've had bourbon before. This isn't bourbon. He swirled the glass dramatically. This is the kind of drink people with real careers buy. He took a sip. You should make sure my glass never gets empty tonight. Then he lowered his voice just enough for only me to hear. I know your little government salary can't afford this stuff. He glanced around. So try not to spill it. I looked at the bottle. Retail price. About $3,200. Expensive. Not impossible. What almost amused me was the fact that one operational retention bonus I received the previous year could have purchased every bottle inside that cabinet. Instead, most of it had disappeared into the trust. Into mortgage payments, insurance, roof repairs, property taxes. Everything standing around Garrison existed because money I earned quietly kept flowing into places nobody questioned. He admired paintings hanging on walls I had helped save. He entertained investors beneath a roof I had prevented from being repossessed. He mocked my income while wearing confidence financed by money he never knew existed. You okay? The bartender asked softly after Garrison turned away. I'm fine. You don't seem like family. I smiled a little. Sometimes I wonder. He looked uncomfortable. Sorry, no need. It wasn't his fault. He only saw what everyone else saw. A woman carrying an event program approached me. Excuse me. Yes. Ma'am? Could you tell whoever owns this house that it's beautiful? I looked around the ballroom. I'll pass it along. She smiled warmly. I hope they appreciate the people who help make evenings like this possible. That sentence stayed with me. Not because she meant it for me. Because she accidentally told the truth. Without realizing it, she had thanked the one person who had quietly protected everything around her. Not the owner. Not the heir. The person carrying the tray. I glanced toward my father. Arthur stood in the center of another crowd, laughing loudly, as though success had always followed him naturally. For a brief second, I imagined telling everyone the truth, showing bank records, transfers, legal trust documents, every anonymous payment, every sacrifice, every night that turned into another mortgage installment instead of another piece of my own life. The thought disappeared as quickly as it came. Recognition had never been the reason I made those choices. My mother used to tell me that doing the right thing only counted when nobody was keeping score. She believed character showed itself best in empty rooms. Tonight, this ballroom was full, yet somehow it had never felt emptier. I adjusted the tray again and continued serving drinks, knowing every polished floor, glowing chandelier, and smiling guests stood inside a life my family believed they had built themselves. They had no idea they were celebrating on borrowed dignity. And before this night was over, the debt they owed the woman carrying the drinks would become impossible to ignore. The weight of that tray pulled me back to another place where every decision carried far more than crystal glasses. Fort Meade never looked impressive from the outside. That was the point. Most people drove past the secure buildings without realizing some of the country's most important battles were being fought inside rooms with no windows, no explosions, no cameras, no headlines. Just rows of monitors, secure terminals, and people who understood that one wrong decision could leave millions sitting in the dark. 3 weeks before my father's dinner party, I had walked through 3 security checkpoints before entering our SIF. No personal electronics, no smartwatches, no outside communication. The heavy vault door sealed behind me with the familiar metallic click. Inside, 28 specialists were already working. Marine cyber operators, NSA analysts, Air Force communications experts, Army network warfare officers, different units, one mission. I placed my classified binder on the operations table. Status: Captain Elena Brooks looked up first. We're tracking coordinated intrusion attempts against regional transmission operators. Started with phishing 42 minutes ago. They're escalating. Lieutenant Mark Chen rotated one monitor toward me. They're pivoting faster than expected. On the display, dozens of network paths lit up in red. The attack wasn't random. Someone knew exactly where to push. I studied the traffic patterns for less than 10 seconds. They're probing for control systems. Brooks nodded. Looks that way. I pointed at another cluster. No. Everyone looked at me. They want us looking there. I highlighted another section of the map. This is the real target. Chen zoomed in, his eyebrows lifted. I completely missed that. They're creating noise. Another analyst leaned closer. The backup authentication servers. Exactly. Hostile state actors rarely attacked head-on. The best ones made you defend the wrong door while they quietly unlocked another. Discount Region 7 from automated synchronization. Brooks hesitated. That'll slow restoration if we're wrong. If I'm wrong, you'll owe me coffee, she smiled. If you're right, we'll still need coffee. The room relaxed for exactly 1 second before everyone returned to work. Humor didn't solve problems. It just reminded people they were still human. Someone announced another update. New malware signature. It mutates every 90 seconds. Don't chase it. What? They expect us to. I walked behind his station. Block the behavior, not the code. He immediately understood. Right. 5 minutes later, the attempted penetration stalled, not stopped, slowed. The attacker changed tactics. Good. That meant they were reacting instead of controlling. A digital chess match had begun. Except losing meant hospitals, airports, emergency dispatch centers, and entire neighborhoods could suddenly lose electricity. There were no spectators, only consequences. Another voice came across our secure communications system. National Operations Center requests estimated impact. I pressed my headset. Commander Montgomery, the room quieted. We assess attempted infrastructure compromise remains contained. Current probability of cascading failure below 8%. A pause. What do you need? Authority to isolate additional network segments if indicators shift. Approved. The line disconnected. Nobody celebrated. Approval simply meant responsibility had grown heavier. Hours disappeared without anyone noticing. Cold coffee, half-eaten protein bars, whiteboards covered with handwritten timelines. Every successful defense created 3 new problems. That was normal. Near midnight, Brooks rubbed her eyes. My husband probably thinks I moved out. You warned him. I know. She smiled tiredly. He still complains. You married an optimist. She laughed once before returning to her keyboard. I glanced toward the digital wall clock. We had been inside for nearly 18 hours. Outside the SIF, somewhere inside a secure locker, my personal phone had been sitting untouched all day. I hadn't thought about it once. Inside this room, family arguments ranked somewhere below software updates. Another alert flashed. Chen spoke first. They're trying another route. I studied it. No. He blinked. They're leaving, not leaving. I enlarged the network diagram. They've realized we identified their access path. Brooks folded her arms. So now what? They'll test one more opening. As if on cue, another warning appeared. Chen shook his head. Unbelievables, I smiled. Predictable. Within 23 minutes, we closed the final avenue. Traffic normalized. Power companies continued operating without customers ever realizing anything had happened. Millions of people would wake up the next morning. Their alarm clocks would work. Coffee makers would start. Traffic lights would change. Hospitals would stay online. Most would never know that several dozen exhausted people inside a windowless building had quietly kept their lives ordinary. That was success. If people noticed your work, something had probably gone wrong. Almost 36 hours after I entered the SIF, we were finally released. The vault door opened. Fresh air felt strange. I walked to the locker area and unlocked mine. My phone vibrated the moment it connected to the network. 38 unread messages. 21 missed calls, none from anyone at work. Most came from Genevieve. I opened the first message. Where are you now? The next one. Garrison needs you to transfer money today. Another. You're destroying this family by refusing to help. Then another. His office lease overdraft is due. Stop pretending you're too busy. I kept scrolling. You always make everything about yourself. Do you even care about your father anymore? Everyone is tired of your excuses. One message arrived only 18 minutes earlier. Whatever fake emergency you're hiding behind, remember family should come first. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Inside one building, I had just helped prevent a coordinated cyber attack against critical infrastructure serving roughly 40 million people across the East Coast. Outside that building, someone believed I had been avoiding text messages because I didn't want to rescue another one of Garrison's failed business ideas. The contrast would have been funny if it weren't so familiar. I locked my phone again. Captain Brooks caught up with me in the parking lot. "Everything okay, family?" She gave me a knowing look, worse than cyber warfare. I smiled. "Different battlefield," she laughed. "I'll take hostile nation states." So would I. We walked toward our cars. The classified operation would never appear on the evening news. No one outside a handful of cleared officials would ever know. My teams had spent a day and a half protecting infrastructure that millions depended on. And when I drove to my father's estate afterward, exhausted enough that my hands still remembered every keyboard command from the SIF, the only thing my family would notice was that I hadn't answered their messages. They never asked what I had been protecting. Only why I hadn't protected Garrison from the consequences of his own choices. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and found myself thinking about another mission my family would never know existed. 14 months earlier, I had been sitting inside a joint operations center watching the Baltic Sea fill an entire wall of classified displays. The room was quieter than usual. Quiet usually meant something had already gone wrong. "Viper, we've lost them." The voice came through my secure headset, my tactical call sign. Nobody in that room called me Scarlet. On another screen, 12 blue markers representing a joint special operations task force had stopped moving. Their communications had disappeared less than 90 seconds earlier. No voice traffic, no encrypted data, nothing. Lieutenant Commander Olivia Hayes turned toward me. Complete signal blackout. Source? Electronic warfare. I studied the spectrum analysis. Not commercial. No, military grade. She nodded once. "They're blanketing everything." General Charles Stanford stepped behind us without saying a word. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched the screens. Everyone in the room knew one fact that wasn't written anywhere on the briefing slides. One of those 12 operators was his nephew. That knowledge stayed unspoken. Professionalism demanded it. The mission came first. Always. A Navy communications officer pointed at another monitor. "We're losing satellite relay too." That changed everything. Without communications, the rescue fleet had no reliable way to locate the team if they were forced to abandon their vessel. The Baltic wasn't forgiving. Cold water didn't negotiate. Minutes mattered. I zoomed into the electronic interference pattern. It looked chaotic. It wasn't. Nothing that sophisticated ever was. They're cycling. Hayes frowned. "What?" "The jammer." I highlighted repeating intervals. "See this?" She leaned closer. "Every 11 seconds. Exactly." The hostile system wasn't transmitting continuously. It pulsed tiny gaps. Almost invisible. Most people would have treated them as noise. I saw opportunity. We can push data through. A civilian systems engineer immediately shook his head. "The administrative firewall won't allow it." "I know." General Stanford finally spoke. "Alternatives? Silence." One analyst suggested waiting for another surveillance aircraft. Another recommended repositioning satellites. Both options required time. The task force didn't have much left. I looked at the network architecture one more time. There was another path. Risky. Unauthorized. Technically prohibited. The administrative firewall separating classified operational routing from emergency tactical routing existed for good reasons. Bypassing it without approval could trigger investigations that ended careers. Or worse. Hayes looked at me. "I know that face." "What face?" "The one where you're about to make everyone's paperwork miserable." A few nervous smiles appeared around the room. I pointed at the routing map. "If we temporarily bypass administrative authentication and inject coordinates during each jammer cycle, we can feed the rescue fleet updated positions." The civilian engineer immediately objected. "That's outside established protocol." "I know. You'll leave an audit trail." "I know. It could violate congressional oversight rules." "I know." General Stanford looked directly at me. "Probability. 78% chance we restore tactical awareness. And failure? This team stays invisible." Nobody spoke. Finally, the general asked one question. "Would you make the same recommendation if my nephew weren't on that vessel?" "Yes, sir." His expression never changed. "Proceed." That authorization covered the mission, not the policy. The responsibility became mine. My fingers moved across the keyboard. Authentication override. Emergency routing. temporary firewall bypass. Every command generated warning messages. Access restriction, administrative reviricurable, gondrixcuration change. I acknowledged each one. There wasn't time to worry about tomorrow's paperwork. The rescue fleet needed coordinates today. Hayes counted beside me. Pulse coming. 3 seconds. 2, 1. Inject. Encrypted locacants shot through the narrow electronic opening before the jammer returned. We waited. Nothing. 5 endless seconds. Then another transmission reached us. Weak. Broken enough. They got it, Hayes whispered. The rescue fleet acknowledged receipt. We repeated the process again and again. Each 11-second opening became another chance to move the fleet closer. 26 minutes later, a helicopter pilot confirmed visual contact. Another transmission followed. 12 personnel recovered. Nobody cheered. Professionals rarely did. Instead, people quietly returned to work. Reports still needed writing. Threat assessments still needed updating. The mission wasn't over simply because lives had been saved. General Stanford paused beside my station before leaving. Good work, Commander. Thank you, sir. He walked away, that was all. No dramatic speeches. No applause. Just 2 words from someone whose opinion carried more weight than medals ever could. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting alone inside a secure conference room facing a congressional oversight panel. No television cameras, no reporters, no audience, only questions. One attorney slid a printed network diagram across the table. Commander Montgomery, did you authorize this firewall bypass? Yes. Were you aware it exceeded standing administrative authority? Yes. Why didn't you request additional approval? There wasn't sufficient time. Another committee member leaned forward. So you knowingly violated protocol. I knowingly prioritized 12 American lives. Silence filled the room. One woman adjusted her glasses. If presented with identical circumstances, would you make this decision again? Yes. Without hesitation, no explanation, just yes. The inquiry lasted nearly 4 hours. When it ended, no one congratulated me. No one criticized me either. The findings remained classified. Officially, the incident barely existed. By Friday evening, I was driving to Alexandria for my mother's memorial gathering. She had loved bringing everyone together. I still tried. Even after she was gone, the front porch looked exactly the same. The white columns, the flower beds, the brass door handle she'd polished every spring. I reached into my pocket for the house key. It didn't fit. I tried again. Nothing. Confused, I rang the bell. Garrison opened the door. Oh, he didn't sound surprised. I forgot you were coming. My key doesn't work. Yeah. He scratched the back of his neck. Dad changed the locks. Why? He shrugged. We needed your room. For what? He stepped aside just enough for me to see inside. Where my bedroom had been, contractors were installing an indoor golf simulator. Impact screen, launch monitor, artificial turf. The framed photograph of Mom and me that had always sat on my dresser was gone. So, Garrison smiled awkwardly. I figured you don't stay here much anyway. Arthur appeared behind him. It's only practical. That was my room. You have an apartment. It was still my room. It was unused space. He said it as casually as someone discussing old furniture. No apology. No conversation. Just another business decision. I stood on the porch carrying the same overnight bag I'd packed every year for Mom's memorial. Inside that house, 12 American families still had their sons because of decisions I had made weeks earlier. One of those sons belonged to the nephew of a 4-star general. Yet at my own mother's home, I wasn't considered important enough to keep a bedroom. Arthur looked at his watch. If you're staying for dinner, try not to make everyone uncomfortable. I looked past him toward the hallway where my room had disappeared. Then I picked up my bag again. Some doors aren't closed with locks. They're closed by the people standing behind them. I turned away without another word, knowing I'd just walked out of the only home my mother had ever tried to keep together, and the people inside never realized they had locked out. The daughter who kept saving everyone except herself. I set another empty tray on the catering table when my father touched my elbow just hard enough to make it feel like an order. Library now. I looked toward the ballroom. The string quartet had started another song. Waiters moved through the crowd with fresh appetizers. Nobody noticed Arthur steering me down the hallway. Genevieve was already waiting inside the library. She stood beside my mother's old mahogany desk with a leather folder tucked under one arm. She smiled the same way real estate agents smiled before pointing out expensive upgrades. "Scarlett," she said sweetly, "we only need a few minutes." Arthur quietly shut the double doors behind us. The laughter from the ballroom became a dull murmur. The library hadn't changed much since my mother decorated it years ago. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a stone fireplace. Family photographs. One picture still showed his mom standing beside the lake house, holding a fishing rod she never actually used. She always has laughed that she enjoyed buying bait more than catching fish. Neither Arthur nor Genevieve looked at that photograph. Their attention stayed on me. Genevieve placed the leather folder on the desk and slid it across the polished wood. I had our attorney prepare something. I didn't touch it. What is it? Just paperwork. Arthur folded his arms. Nothing complicated. I opened the folder. The first page answered everything. Irrevocable property relinquishment agreement, my name, Garrison's name, the lake house, transfer of my 50% ownership interest, permanent, non-revocable, no financial compensation. I turned another page, then another. 23 pages total. Someone had spent real money preparing this. I closed the folder. No. Genevieve kept smiling. You didn't finish reading. I didn't need to. Arthur sighed dramatically. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. It already is. He walked behind my mother's desk as though he still owned every memory inside the room. You barely use that property. It isn't about using it. Then what? It was Mom's. Arthur dismissed that with one wave of his hand. Sentiment doesn't pay taxes. I almost answered. Instead, I looked around the room. My mother's favorite reading chair still sat beside the fireplace. Nobody had moved it, probably because it matched the furniture, not because anyone missed her. Genevieve leaned forward. Garrison has plans. I'm sure he does. He wants to renovate the lake house into an executive retreat. I nodded slowly. With what money? The smile disappeared for half a second. Only half. Long enough. There it was. The first crack. Arthur immediately stepped in. His investors are committed. They are? Absolutely. Then why does he need my half? Silence, very short. Very revealing. Genevieve recovered first. It simplifies financing. I almost laughed. No. It didn't simplify financing. It created collateral. That meant lenders wanted full ownership before approving another loan. Interesting. I remembered hearing Garrison bragging 6 months earlier about expanding his consulting company. He had leased a larger downtown office, hired employees too quickly, bought luxury furniture instead of clients. Numbers didn't lie, people did. Arthur pushed the folder closer. Sign it. No, this isn't a negotiation. It actually is. His jaw tightened. I built everything this family has. That sentence hung in the air. Neither of us corrected it. Not yet. Genevieve picked up an expensive fountain pen and placed it beside the papers. We're family. No. She blinked. We're related. The room became very quiet. Arthur's patience finally cracked. You've always been difficult. I've always answered honestly. You've always thought you're better than everyone. I never said that. You didn't have to. He leaned both hands onto the desk. You disappear for weeks. My job requires. There you go again. He cut me off. Always hiding behind that mysterious government work. He laughed without humor. If it were actually important, someone would know. I looked at him for a long moment. Someone did know. Quite a few people, actually. Just not the people standing in this room. Arthur tapped the paperwork. This ends tonight. It already has. I said sign it. No. His face hardened. I can solve this another way. I waited. If you refuse, you're no longer a Montgomery. I almost smiled. I was born one. I'll make sure nobody in this city treats you like family. Genevieve crossed her arms. People talk. Arthur nodded. I know the editor of Alexandria Society Weekly. Of course he did. He loved local society magazines more than national newspapers because they printed photographs from charity galas. I'll tell them exactly what's happened. What happened? You've become unstable. I said nothing, he continued. Years of military stress. Genevieve joined in. Exhaustion. Isolation. Emotional problems. Arthur looked almost pleased with himself. It'll explain everything. I stared at him. He mistook silence for fear. I'll make sure people know you're refusing reasonable family requests because your mental health has deteriorated. Genevieve added softly. Honestly, people would believe it. Maybe they would. The public often confused secrecy with instability. Classified work invited speculation. But something about Arthur's performance felt forced. I looked down at the paperwork again, then at the pen, then back at him. Not at his face, at his watch. A luxury Swiss model he had bought 3 years earlier. He kept adjusting the leather band, a nervous habit. His right foot tapped once, then again. Genevieve kept checking her phone every few seconds, waiting. For what? Approval? News? A bank? The pieces started fitting together. Garrison didn't simply want the lake house. He needed it immediately. That explained everything. The urgency, the attorney, the prepared documents, the emotional pressure, the threats. People with strong financial positions didn't panic over signatures. People running out of options did. I remembered something Garrison had mentioned earlier while showing off for investors. He had accidentally named a commercial property I recognized, its lease renewal date, this month. Then another memory surfaced. Genevieve's unanswered texts from weeks earlier. Office overdrafts, transfer requests, emergency cash. The puzzle solved itself. His company wasn't struggling. It was finished. Bankrupt. Probably not officially yet, but close enough that creditors were circling. The lake house wasn't about preserving family history. It was emergency collateral. Arthur mistook my silence for surrender. I knew you'd understand. He pushed the pen toward me again. I picked it up. Both of them relaxed. Genevieve even smiled. I uncapped it, looked at the signature line, then quietly placed the pen back on the desk. Exactly where it had been. No. Arthur slammed one hand onto the mahogany. You ungrateful little. You don't need my signature. His eyes narrowed. You need my property. Neither he nor Genevieve spoke. I continued calmly. Those aren't the same thing. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine uncertainty cross both of their faces. They suddenly realized I wasn't refusing because I was emotional. I was refusing because I understood exactly how desperate they had become. Before either of them could answer, a burst of applause echoed from the ballroom. Another wave of guests had arrived. Among them was someone neither my father nor Genevieve had expected to see. And within the next hour, every plan they had carefully arranged inside this library would become completely meaningless. As unbelievable as this confrontation already seemed, it kept reminding me of another story we've covered on this channel, where a carefully hidden truth shattered an entire family's lives in a single moment. If you want to see how that one unfolded, watch for it in the top right corner of your screen, between minutes 45 and 55. I slipped this unsigned paperwork back into Genevieve's folder before opening the library door. The sound of conversation flooded back into the hallway. Arthur stepped in front of me. We're not finished. We are. His smile returned before anyone walking past could notice the anger underneath. We'll discuss your attitude later. I'm sure you will. He straightened his tuxedo jacket and immediately transformed back into the charming host. It was impressive. Some people spent decades mastering business. My father had mastered performance. He greeted a federal judge as though nothing had happened. Genevieve followed him into the ballroom with the same polished smile she wore in charity photographs. I walked toward the catering station. One of the servers noticed my empty hands. You disappear for 5 minutes and suddenly everyone wants champagne. I guess timing matters. He handed me another silver tray. This one felt even heavier. Crystal champagne flutes circled a silver ice bucket in the center. The polished handles dug into my palms as I lifted it. Need a break? He asked. I'm okay. You don't look okay. I've looked worse, he laughed. I'll remember that next time I'm tired. Sometimes the kindest conversations lasted less than 10 seconds. The ballroom had transformed while I was gone. Nearly 150 guests now filled the room. Federal judges, corporate CEOs, partners from prestigious law firms, retired admirals, senior military officers attending in civilian suits, political donors, technology executives. The kind of people who exchanged business cards before learning first names. Round tables stretched across the ballroom beneath towering chandeliers. Every place setting had engraved name cards. Every wine glass stood at the exact same angle. Arthur loved precision when someone else handled it. A photographer adjusted lighting near the stage. Another assistant checked microphones. Someone whispered into an earpiece. Dinner service would begin in minutes. I started moving through the crowd again. Champagne? Thank you. One more. Looks wonderful. Nobody noticed how carefully I balanced the tray despite my shoulders protesting every step. Fatigue had become background noise years ago. A retired Navy captain accepted a glass from me. Appreciate it. His eyes lingered for a second. You military? I blinked. What? Ask the way you stand. I almost smiled. I've been told posture matters. He nodded. It does. Before he could ask another question, Arthur appeared beside us. Our server has excellent posture. The captain looked confused. Arthur laughed. My daughter insists on treating everything like government business. The captain smiled politely. I see. He walked away. Arthur's expression hardened the moment the captain disappeared into the crowd. I told you not to attract attention. I handed him a drink. You invited conversation. He spoke first. I don't care. He looked around the ballroom. You're making people curious. I didn't realize curiosity was dangerous. It is when it embarrasses me. That answer explained more than he intended. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the version of our family he had carefully manufactured. He scanned the room before pointing toward the back wall beside the service corridor. Stand over there. I followed his finger. The position sat partially hidden behind a decorative column near the swinging kitchen doors. Guests would barely notice anyone standing there. I'm serving tables. Not anymore. Why? Because photographers are about to start. I waited. He lowered his voice. You've had a long day. Yes. You look exhausted. Also, yes. I don't want that. Expression in the family pictures. There it was. Not concern. Image management. Arthur folded one arm across his chest. Stay against the back wall so people won't see me? So your appearance doesn't distract from the evening. I looked down at myself. Clean trench coat, pressed trousers, polished shoes, nothing inappropriate, nothing embarrassing, except apparently me. I understand, I said. I doubt that. No, I adjusted the tray. I understand perfectly. He walked away before realizing those words hadn't meant what he thought they did. I took my place beside the SIRS entrance. The wall behind me stayed cool against my shoulder. Kitchen staff moved quietly through the swinging doors every few seconds carrying plated dinners. One young server whispered as he passed, "Family?" Unfortunately, he gave me an understanding nod. My uncle only invites me when he needs free labor. I smiled. You're getting paid. Fair point. Even standing against the wall, I couldn't stop observing the room. Old habits. Every entrance, every exit, every security concern, every unfamiliar face. Training never disappeared simply because you changed locations. Across the ballroom, Garrison worked the crowd confidently. He laughed too loudly, shook too many hands, promised too many future partnerships. One investor asked a question that visibly tightened his smile. Even from across the room, I recognized someone buying time instead of giving answers. Interesting. Another photographer gathered members of the Montgomery family near the stage. Arthur looked toward me, then deliberately looked away. The message couldn't have been clearer. Not you. A few minutes later, dinner ended and the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, our host, Mr. Arthur Montgomery. Applause filled the ballroom. Arthur stepped onto the stage with effortless confidence. He loved microphones almost as much as mirrors. Thank you, everyone. More applause. What an incredible honor to welcome such distinguished guests into our family home. He thanked sponsors, charities, business partners, friends. Then he raised his champagne glass. Tonight is also special for another reason. He extended one hand toward Garrison, my son. Garrison stood. People applauded again. Arthur smiled proudly. Garrison represents everything the Montgomery name stands for. Confidence, vision, leadership. I almost laughed. Those 3 words described several people I knew. None of them were Garrison. Arthur continued. He is the future of our family. Another wave of applause rolled through the ballroom. Then his eyes found me, standing exactly where he had ordered, still carrying the heavy silver tray. He pointed directly toward the back wall. And over there, several guests turned to look, is our quiet little assistant. A ripple of polite laughter spread across the room. Arthur chuckled with them. She's living proof of what happens when you never develop the drive to succeed. More laughter, not cruel, not loud. The uncomfortable kind people offered because everyone else seemed to think they should. Several guests quickly looked away. A federal judge lowered his eyes. The retired Navy captain frowned slightly. One woman stopped clapping altogether. Not everyone found it amusing, but nobody challenged the host. I remained exactly where I was, back straight, shoulders level, tray balanced, breathing steady. 4 seconds in, hold. 4 seconds out, hold. The same rhythm that had carried me through operations rooms, congressional inquiries, and long nights protecting people who would never know my name. Across the ballroom, Garrison slowly lifted his champagne glass toward me. A silent toast. His grin stretched wider than ever. Victory. That's what he thought this was. He had no idea the room was only minutes away from learning that the woman he believed he had finally reduced to a servant had spent years carrying responsibilities none of them could even imagine. The next footsteps echoing through the front entrance, would change every face in that ballroom forever. I lowered my eyes to the tray for a second, mostly so I wouldn't have to watch my father enjoying the applause. Then the sound reached me. Not applause, not music. A heavy thud echoed from the front entrance. Every conversation in the ballroom slowed for a heartbeat. Then came another and another. Solid, measured footsteps, not hurried, not hesitant, purposeful. The massive oak doors at the front of the estate swung open with enough force that both brass handles struck the walls behind them. The string quartet stopped playing in the middle of a note. Every head in the ballroom turned at once. A uniform entered first, dark blue dress uniform, rows of ribbons, decorations, gold braid. Then 4 unmistakable silver stars. General Charles Stanford walked through the doorway without looking left or right. His posture alone changed the atmosphere. People who had been laughing seconds earlier suddenly stood straighter without realizing it. Military officers scattered around the ballroom immediately recognized him. Several instinctively set down their glasses. A retired Marine colonel quietly whispered, "Good Lord." Another guest answered under his breath, "That's Stanford." The Stanford? There isn't another one. Even among powerful people, some names carried a different kind of weight. This wasn't celebrity. This wasn't politics. This was authority earned over decades. Behind the general came 2 aides in formal dress uniforms. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. They simply followed at the exact distance expected of officers accustomed to operating beside someone who represented an entire command. Arthur's looked stunned for less than a second. Then excitement replaced confusion. His smile became almost childlike. He hurried off the stage so quickly he nearly missed the last step. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly while walking toward the entrance. "What an incredible surprise!" Garrison rushed beside him. "Dad, I know." Arthur straightened his jacket again. "This is unbelievable." Genevieve whispered excitedly, "Imagine the photographs." Arthur was already thinking further ahead. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the business opportunities. Imagine telling everyone for the next 20 years that General Charles Stanford had attended a Montgomery event. He practically floated across the marble floor. Guests instinctively stepped aside to create a clear path. Arthur reached the general first. His hand shot forward. "General Stanford!" The general slow. Arthur kept smiling. "I'm Arthur Montgomery." No response. "My family is honored." General Stanford walked directly past the extended hand as though it simply wasn't there. Arthur froze. His smile remained, only because embarrassment hadn't caught up yet. Garrison quickly stepped in to rescue the moment. "General, I'm Garrison Montgomery." He reached out confidently. "I'd love to personally welcome." The general passed him too. No handshake, no eye contact, nothing. It wasn't rude, it was complete indifference. One of the general's aides subtly adjusted his path just enough to avoid brushing Garrison's shoulder. The movement lasted less than a second. It said everything. Arthur forced a nervous laugh. "I'm sure the general is focused." Nobody answered. The room had become strangely quiet. Guests exchanged confused looks. A federal judge quietly asked the retired Navy captain, "Do they know each other?" The captain slowly shook his head. If they did, he watched the general continue walking. This wouldn't be happening. He hurried alongside the general. "Sir, if there's anything my family can do." Still nothing. Not a glance, not a nod, not even polite acknowledgement. For the first time all evening, my father looked completely unsure of himself. That almost never happened. People like Arthur built their confidence by assuming important people would automatically recognize them. General Stanford had shattered that assumption in less than 20 feet. The general continued moving through the center aisle. His pace never changed. Neither did his expression. He wasn't looking at the chandeliers. He wasn't looking at the guests. He certainly wasn't looking at Arthur. His eyes remained fixed on one destination. Only one. I knew that look. Mission focus. I had seen it during operations, briefings, crisis meetings. When General Stanford walked like that, something mattered. The ballroom slowly realized he wasn't attending the dinner. He had come for someone. The question spread silently across the room. "Who?" Genevieve whispered to Arthur. "Maybe he's here for Judge Ellison." Arthur nodded quickly. "Or Senator Reeves." Someone else guessed one of the defense contractors. Another guessed the retired admiral. Nobody looked toward the back wall, nobody except one person. The retired Navy captain who had spoken with me earlier quietly followed the general's line of sight. His eyes landed on me, then returned to the general. A small crease formed between his eyebrows. He noticed, not understood. Just noticed. I stayed exactly where I was, tray balanced, hands steady, the silver handles dug into my palms. My pulse remained slow. Years of training had taught me one simple lesson. Never assume why someone arrives until they tell you. General Stanford came within 30 feet. 20, 15. Arthur finally stopped trying to intercept him. He had run out of ways to introduce himself. The general's aides also continued forward without hesitation. Every person standing between us quietly stepped aside. The path opened naturally, like water moving around a ship. One young catering server glanced at me. "I think he's coming this way." "I know." "You know him?" I answered honestly. "Yes." The server's eyes widened. Before he could ask another question, General Stanford reached the final stretch of marble floor leading toward the service entrance. Every conversation had completely stopped. 150 guests watched in absolute silence. Arthur slowly turned. So did Garrison. They followed the general's line of travel for the very first time. Their eyes reached the dark corner beside the kitchen doors. They reached me. Confusion crossed both of their faces. Arthur even looked behind me, as though expecting another distinguished guest to be standing somewhere out of sight. There wasn't. Only me, still wearing the same plain trench coat, still holding the same silver tray, still standing exactly where my father had ordered me to stay so I wouldn't ruin his photographs. General Stanford never looked anywhere else. His focus remained locked on me with the calm certainty of someone who had already found exactly who he came for. And when he stopped just a few feet away, the entire ballroom held its breath, completely unaware that the next movement from one of the most powerful military leaders in America was about to erase every lie my family had spent years telling. I tightened my grip on the silver tray as General Stanford stopped directly in front of me. The entire ballroom went silent. Not the polite silence people used during speeches, the kind that happened when nobody understood what they were seeing. The general looked exactly as he always did during classified briefings. Calm, focused, impossible to distract. For one brief second, neither of us spoke. Then his polished dress shoes shifted. His boots came together with a sharp crack that echoed across the marble floor. Every military veteran in the room recognized the sound instantly. General Charles Stanford stood perfectly erect. Without the slightest hesitation, his right hand snapped upward in a flawless salute. It wasn't casual, it wasn't symbolic, it was a regulation military salute given by a 4-star general to a superior officer in command authority for the moment at hand. 150 people stared at the woman still holding a serving tray. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for a drink. The retired Navy captain I had spoken with earlier slowly stood from his chair. His mouth fell slightly open. A retired Air Force brigadier general, sitting near the front, whispered to his wife, "That's not ceremonial." She looked confused. "What does it mean?" He never took his eyes off General Stanford. "It means he knows exactly who she is." Arthur blinked several times. "Dad," Garrison whispered. "I don't." Arthur couldn't finish the sentence. Genevieve looked from the general to me and back again. This has to be some kind of mistake. It wasn't. I shifted the tray onto the catering table beside me. Crystal glasses clinked softly as the weight left my hands. Only then did I return the salute. My right hand rose smoothly to my temple. Every movement came from years of repetition, nothing rushed, nothing exaggerated, just clean, professional precision. The general held the salute another moment before lowering his hand. I lowered mine as well. The room remained frozen. Arthur finally laughed, a nervous, uncertain laugh. "General." He stepped forward. "I think you've confused my daughter with someone else." General Stanford didn't even turn his head. Arthur tried again. "She's just." The general spoke before he could finish. "That will be enough." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Authority has a way of filling a room without raising its voice. Arthur immediately stopped talking. I've seen admirals, cabinet officials, and senators react exactly the same way. Some voices simply carried years of earned command. General Stanford looked directly at me. His expression remained professional. No smile, no unnecessary emotion, only purpose. "Commander Montgomery." The title rolled across the ballroom like thunder. "Commander." Not assistant, not waitress, not government clerk, "Commander." Several guests repeated the word quietly to themselves. What did he say? "Commander." Did he just? The retired Navy captain slowly nodded as if pieces were finally fitting together. General Stanford continued, The Joint Chiefs require your immediate presence in the SIF. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Many guests had no idea what a SIF even was. Those who did immediately stopped whispering. Then came the sentence that erased every remaining doubt. We have a Level 1 national security breach. Nobody laughed now. Nobody reached for another drink. The atmosphere changed completely. Federal judges exchanged serious looks. Military officers instinctively straightened in their seats. Several defense executives quietly lowered their phones instead of trying to record anything. They understood. If a 4-star general personally came looking for someone during an event like this, the situation had already exceeded normal procedures. Arthur looked as though someone had removed the floor beneath him. No, he shook his head. There has to be. He searched for another explanation. None came. Garrison stared at me without blinking. The desk job, he whispered the words almost to himself. I looked at neither of them. My attention remained on General Stanford. Sir. He gave one brief nod. A secure vehicle is waiting outside. I understand. We're under operational time. Constraints. I'll be ready in less than 1 minute. Very good. No drama, no speeches. Just the kind of conversation that happened every day inside secure facilities. Only tonight, 150 strangers happened to be listening. Genevieve finally found her voice. Arthur. She grabbed his sleeve. You said she worked in an office. Arthur pulled his arm away without answering, because he couldn't. Every story he had told about me over the years was collapsing in real time. The retired Air Force general approached slowly. He looked at me before speaking. His tone carried genuine respect. I don't believe we've met. No, sir. He extended his hand. It would be an honor. I shook it briefly. The honor is mine. Several other military guests immediately stood, not because protocol required it, because respected. The retired Navy captain walked over next. I knew something didn't add up. I smiled slightly. What gave it away? You never stood like someone serving drink. That earned the first quiet laugh of the evening, a real one. Not forced, not cruel. Even General Stanford allowed the corner of his mouth to move ever so slightly. Arthur watched every handshake, every respectful nod, every title. His face had lost all color. The same people he had spent years trying to impress were now looking past him, toward me, not because I wanted attention, because the truth had finally entered the room. One defense contractor quietly asked another, "Do you know what level she would have to be for Stanford himself to come?" The other man answered without hesitation, "Very high, higher than that." General Stanford glanced toward one of his aides. The aide handed him a secure black portfolio. He didn't open it, he simply held it at his side. Even that small detail told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had happened was serious enough that classified documents had traveled with him. Arthur suddenly stepped forward again. "General," his voice cracked, if my daughter is actually involved in government work?" General Stanford finally looked at him for the first time that evening. The silence lasted only a second. It felt much longer. Then the general answered with complete composure. "Mr. Montgomery." Arthur swallowed. "Yes, sir, you have absolutely no idea who your daughter is." No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. The rooms itself had become the answer. The woman who had been ordered to stand against the wall carrying drinks was now being summoned by the highest levels of America's national security leadership. And for the first time in my life, my family's version of me no longer mattered, because the truth was standing in front of them in full uniform, even if I wasn't wearing it. I reached for my trench coat, ready to leave with General Stanford, when one of his aides leaned in and quietly handed him a secure satellite phone. The general listened for less than 10 seconds. Understood. He ended the call and looked toward the audiovisual technician standing beside the ballroom stage. "I'll need your projector." The young technician froze. "Sir, the projector." Arthur finally found enough courage to speak. "General, if there's anything in this house you need, please, there is." General Stanford held up a small encrypted device about the size of a smartphone. "I need one HDMI cable." The technician nearly tripped over himself, plugging the cable into the ballroom's presentation system. The giant LED screen behind the stage flickered. Arthur tried forcing another smile. "I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding." Nobody answered him. The screen turned black. A Department of Defense seal slowly appeared. Several retired military officers immediately recognized the format. "This isn't public software," one quietly said. Another nodded. "No, it isn't." A security notice filled the screen. Department of Defense Off-Wars declassified briefing limited its expression. The ballroom became even quieter. General Stanford entered a security code on the encrypted device. The presentation opened. The first slide filled the massive display behind him. A formal military portrait appeared, not a passport photo, not an employee identification picture, an official Department of Defense command photograph. Me, wearing my service uniform. Above the photograph appeared a line of text. As Commander Scarlett E. Montgomery, United States Cyber Command. Several people gasped. Arthur stared at the screen. His eyes moved from the photograph to me, back to the photograph, then back again. It was the first time all evening he had actually looked at me, not the version of me he had invented. The real one. The next slide appeared. Crankishment, Joint Cyber Operations Commander, Critical Infrastructure Defense. Beneath it appeared several declassified operation summaries, dates, mission titles, successful defensive actions. Every classified detail had been removed. Only the achievements remained. The retired Air Force generals slowly exhaled. My God, another officer quietly said. She's been leading joint operations. The third slide appeared. At the center sat a familiar medal, Silver Star. Below it was a short declassified citation. Awarded for extraordinary gallantry while directing emergency tactical cyber operations under hostile electronic warfare conditions, resulting in the successful rescue of 12 United States Special Operations personnel. The ballroom stood perfectly still. Nobody needed to ask which mission it referred to. General Stanford finally spoke. 14 months ago. His voice remained calm. Commander Montgomery made a decision that violated administrative protocol in order to save American lives. He looked toward the retired officers in the audience. That decision brought every one of those operators home. He paused briefly. My nephew was among them. No one moved. No one even shifted in their chairs. Respect had replaced curiosity. Arthur looked as though breathing had become difficult. His lips moved. No sound came out. The next slide displayed a simplified operational map. The classified portions had been removed. Only broad regions remained visible. Small blue icons moved slowly across the display. General Stanford turned slightly toward the audience. This represents one of Commander Montgomery's current operational responsibilities. He pointed toward the highlighted region. The systems under her team's protection directly support essential infrastructure, serving approximately 40 million Americans. Someone quietly whispered, 40 million. Another answered, and she's standing here carrying drinks. The irony settled over the room without anyone needing to explain it. General Stanford disconnected nothing. Instead, another live information window opened. Across the top appeared a single line. Crank operational. Several indicators flashed, green, amber, red. One alert changed from amber to red. A military officer near the front immediately recognized what he was seeing. That's real. Another nodded. It isn't a recording. No, it wasn't. The situation had continued evolving while we stood inside this ballroom. General Stanford turned toward me. For the first time all evening, he lowered his chin slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. The gesture carried enormous meaning. Respect between professionals. Trust built over years. Then he spoke. Your orders, Commander? Every military guest instinctively focused on me. The general continued. The fleet is standing by. No one in the room misunderstood the question. He wasn't asking for permission because of rank. Operational command belonged to whoever held responsibility for the mission. At this moment, that was me. I stepped forward. The ballroom disappeared. The chandeliers, the expensive tuxedos, the whispers. None of it mattered anymore, only the mission. I studied the operational display for a few seconds. One route had changed, exactly as I expected. I looked at the general. Foldernized distributed isolation for the affected network segment. Approved. Shift Fleet Cyber Group Bravo to redundant monitoring. One aide immediately wrote it down. Yes, ma'am. Maintain civilian infrastructure priority. Understood. If additional escalation occurs before I arrive, execute continuity protocol echo. General Stanford nodded once. It will be done. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. No dramatic speeches, no shouting. Just experienced professionals solving another problem. Behind me, something shattered. Everyone turned. Garrison stood frozen beside his chair. His champagne glass lay in dozens of pieces across the marble floor. Golden champagne spread between the broken crystal. He hadn't even realized he had dropped it. His face carried the same stunned expression, as someone watching the ground disappear beneath his feet. Genevieve reached for his arm. He didn't react. Arthur looked worse. The color had drained from his face until it resembled wet ash. The retired Navy captain slowly turned toward him. You called her lazy. No answer. The retired Air Force general added quietly, you introduced a Silver Star recipient as your assistant. Another military officer shook his head. I've attended retirement ceremonies for officers with half her record. Arthur finally tried speaking. I didn't, but there wasn't a sentence in the English language capable of repairing what everyone had witnessed. The guests no longer saw a wealthy businessman hosting an elegant dinner. They saw a father who had publicly humiliated his own daughter without ever bothering to learn who she really was. One by one, people looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with surprise, with respect. The kind that couldn't be purchased with donations, country club memberships, or expensive watches. It had to be earned. General Stanford picked up the secure device and handed it back to his aide. Then he looked around the ballroom one final time. The Department of Defense does not reveal the identities of officers like Commander Montgomery unless operational necessity demands it. His eyes settled briefly on Arthur. Tonight, operational necessity included restoring the truth. No one applauded, no one celebrated. This wasn't a victory, it was a correction. The truth had finally walked into the room under its own authority, and every lie my family had built over the years collapsed without anyone needing to raise their voice. I picked up my trench coat from the back of the chair and looked at General Stanford. I'm ready, he nodded once. We'll head out as soon as you're finished here. There wasn't much left to finish. At least, that's what I thought. Commander. Arthur's voice stopped me before I reached the ballroom doors. It sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Not Scarlet, not assistant, not girl, Commander. He had finally learned my title. It came years too late. I turned around. He stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by guests who suddenly seemed far less interested in talking to him than they had been an hour earlier. His shoulders had dropped. His confidence had gone with them. I didn't know. I know. If you had told me, I couldn't. I mean, he looked around the room, searching for words that never arrived. I would have treated you differently. I shook my head. That's the problem. He frowned. You should have treated me with respect before you knew what I did. Silence answered me. I walked back toward the mahogany desk where the estate paperwork still sat inside Genevieve's leather folder. I opened it. The unsigned transfer agreement remained exactly where she had left it. I removed another document from my own coat pocket. It had been folded neatly all evening, a single-page authorization addressed to Daniel Cross, the attorney managing the Montgomery Family Preservation Trust. Arthur noticed the letterhead immediately. Why do you have Daniel's paperwork? I looked at him, because I hired him. Confusion spread across his face. What? The trust. He blinked. What about it? Nobody spoke. Not Arthur, not Garrison, not Genevieve, I continued quietly. For 7 years, Arthur laughed once. A short, confused sound. That's impossible. It isn't. The trust came from your grandfather. No. I unfolded the document. It came from my combat hazard pay. Another page followed. And my operational bonuses. Another. And classified incentive compensation. I handed the papers to him. He stared at the transactions month after month, year after year, deposits, mortgage payments, property tax payments, insurance, emergency repairs, every transfer out through Daniel Cross, everyone connected to my accounts. Arthur's hands began shaking. No. His eyes moved faster. $8,500, he whispered the number. Every month. Exactly. The estate never recovered after Mom died. I answered before he finished. I kept it alive. He looked around the ballroom. As if someone else might explain why reality had suddenly changed. Nobody could. Because the paperwork didn't care about pride. Numbers rarely lied. Garrison grabbed one page. His face lost what little color remained. You paid the office lease you thought Dad covered. I looked at him calmly. The tax liens, the roof, the insurance after the storm. Genevieve slowly sat down without saying a word. Everything she had believed about the family's wealth disappeared in less than a minute. Arthur looked at me again. You saved this house. Yes, and the lake house, yes. Why? The question surprised me. Not because he asked it. Because he genuinely didn't know. Because Mom loved them. He closed his eyes. For the first time all evening, he looked every bit of his 65 years. Not powerful, not influential, just tired. I placed the authorization letter on top of the trust documents. I signed this yesterday. Daniel had prepared it after our phone call earlier that week, effective immediately. The Montgomery Family Preservation Trust would terminate. All future payments canceled. No extensions, no appeasals, no emergency funding. Arthur read the first paragraph, then the second. His breathing became uneven. You can't. I already did. The mortgage returns to you. The taxes return to you. The maintenance returns to you. He looked genuinely frightened now. Without the trust, the estate couldn't survive. Neither could the image he had spent decades protecting. Garrison spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear him. The bank will eventually make its own decisions. Nobody needed me to explain foreclosure. Adults understood consequences. Genevieve finally stood. Scarlett, it was the first time she had spoken my name without sarcasm. We can work something out. We already did. When? Every month for 7 years. She lowered her eyes. I took out my phone. 3 contacts. Arthur, Garrison. Genevieve. One after another. Block, block, block. The screen confirmed each action. Done. Not out of revenge, out of peace. I wasn't only ending financial support, I was ending the belief that loving someone meant carrying responsibilities they refused to carry themselves. General Stanford waited quietly by the entrance. He never interrupted. Some endings deserved privacy. I reached into my coat one last time. My mother's embroidered handkerchief rested inside the pocket, exactly where I always kept it. Small blue flowers stitched carefully into one corner. She had sewn them herself years ago. I folded it once between my fingers, not because I needed comfort, because I wanted to remember the only person in this family who had never measured love by usefulness. Without another word, I walked toward the front doors. Nobody stopped me. Nobody knew how. Outside, cool autumn air replaced the heavy warmth of the ballroom. The secure vehicle waited at the bottom of the steps. Its engine was already running. Behind me, the mansion stood exactly as it had when I arrived. White columns, bright windows, perfect landscaping. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I paused on the concrete steps and took one slow, unhurried breath. For years, I had believed silence meant carrying everyone else's burdens. Tonight, I finally understood something different. Silence can also mean refusing to argue with people who have already chosen not to see you. General Stanford opened the rear passenger door. Ready, Commander? I smiled. For the first time in a long time. I looked back at the house one last time, not with anger, not with regret, just acceptance. Then I got into the vehicle. As we pulled away, the estate slowly disappeared behind the trees, carrying with it every debt that had never truly belonged to me. What stayed with me wasn't the humiliation, the applause, or even the truth finally being revealed. It was something my mother once told me when I was still learning what kind of person I wanted to become. She said that respect given only after someone discovers your success isn't respect at all. It's convenience. Real character is shown in how you treat people before you know what they can do for you. I carried that lesson into every mission after she was gone, even when nobody knew my name. Protecting others doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity forever. Kindness without boundaries eventually becomes permission for people to keep taking. If this story stays with you, I hope it reminds you that your worth has never depended on the loudest voice in the room. The people who truly deserve a place in your life will never require proof before they choose to respect you. And before you leave, take a look at the story waiting for you on your screen. It's one of the most unforgettable cases we've shared on this channel, and once you see how that family's hidden truth came to light, you'll understand why so many viewers still talk about it long after the video ends.